What's up everybody, and welcome to a special episode dedicated to the train wreck that is Halo Infinite's development. As we saw previously, 343 did a respectable job continuing Halo once Bungie left, with the biggest issue being the Master Chief's broken multiplayer that took years to fix. However, 343 also proved they could create engaging original content like Halo 4's intimate story or the sheer amount of maps and modes seen in Halo 5's excellent back-to-basics arena multiplayer. There was also just over 6 years between the releases of Halo 5 and Infinite, so 343 had more than enough time to develop all aspects into a critically acclaimed experience by taking the excellent components of previous games and just iterating on them. This obviously didn't happen, and here's why. (2,235 days). That's the amount of time between the releases of Halo 5 Guardians and Halo Infinite. This is over twice as long as the 1,086 days between Halo 4 and 5. Yet even with one of the longest and most expensive development cycles in history, I'd argue that as an overall package, Infinite is actually worse than these other numbered entries 343 created. Here's just a taste of what was wrong with Halo Infinite at launch. The disjointed story was easily the weakest part of Halo 5, yet once again, 343 wrote a story that required the player to go outside of mainline Halo entries to fully understand it. As if you didn't play through Halo Wars 2, you would have no idea who the main antagonists were in The Banished. Speaking of the campaign, its semi-open world of Zeta Halo only had one biome. This was due to 343 cutting around 2/3 of content well into development just to ship the game within 7 years. There was also no way to replay main missions, a basic feature every prior Halo game launched with. There was even no local co-op despite 343 promising they would never do this again after omitting it in Halo 5. Hell, there wasn't even online co-op this time. For the multiplayer, Infinite launched with less than half the maps Guardians did, and didn't even include modes that were staples of the franchise like SWAT. There was also no Forge mode, so players couldn't even make their own content to make up for 343's lack of maps. 343 also couldn't implement ray tracing in time for launch, but to be fair, this is pretty much a non-issue because even with full-path ray tracing, the graphics would still not compare to other first-party cross-generation games like Forza Horizon 5. And even with these poor graphics, the game did not run well, especially on PC, where it was one of the most poorly optimized games of 2021. And yes, that even includes the cutscenes, where for some bizarre reason, facial animations ran at 30 FPS. I could go on about the desync in multiplayer, battle pass issues, problematic microtransactions, etc., but you get the point.
When you look back on these last days, you will realize that all you've built was a tomb. A place where hope dies.
Look, to be clear, I don't think Halo Infinite is a bad game. The semi-open world, introduction of new gameplay mechanics like the grappling hook, and the great but small amount of multiplayer content that was there led to a lot of fun at launch. And to be fair to 343, a lot of the complaints have been fixed over the past year. But none of this takes away from the fact that even in 2023, Halo Infinite is not close to the game it should have been, considering it's 6 years in development and access to Microsoft's financial resources. And yes, especially at launch, it was a worse game than Halo 4 and 5. The two biggest complaints about Guardians was its horrendous story and lack of local co-op. Yet after 6 years, these problems still made their way to Infinite, and in the case of co-op, was actually in an even worse situation. I'm telling you now, the reason why the industry goes so hard at Guardians is because the general stink of the Xbox One's original vision has tainted the early exclusives the console released. Games like Guardians, Sunset Overdrive, and Quantum Break were all flawed, but they were still great games that don't get the respect they deserve. I mean, just look at this picture. Look at the consistent yet substantial updates Guardians multiplayer received over the first year. And this is on top of the 20 maps at launch, which is still more than Infinite has received 13 months after its launch. Are we really going to act like 343 are in a better position multiplayer-wise in 2023 than they were 7 years ago? It's objectively not true.
In 2019, 343 showed a new trailer, which is basically the final game's introduction sequence. This is far more interesting. It feels like the general quality of the rendering is more robust in this preview footage. For starters, the self-shadows and lighting are improved, and the depth of field is of higher quality, plus the pilot's skin exhibits proper subsurface scattering. In addition, the animation feels more natural and less exaggerated. It still very much looks like something that should be possible in real time though, but there's an extra layer of quality here I think that's missing in the final game.
As for Halo 4, the biggest issues were its COD-inspired multiplayer, its soundtrack, and unambitious level design. Fair point, but all can be somewhat forgiven. After all, Bungie were the ones who introduced COD-like elements into Halo multiplayer with Halo Reach. No one out there was going to compete with Martin O'Donnell's work on their first attempt at a Halo OST, and Halo 4's corridor-like design was hamstrung by a console that was released 7 years earlier. Even Bungie got slated when it was announced that Halo 3's resolution was sub-HD, so there was no way 343 could get away with bad graphics in favour of opening up level design. Besides, it was their first game, and yet they still got a lot right, like the story, that's comparable to what Sony's producing at Naughty Dog in Santa Monica. If anything, seeing just how much worse 343 storytelling has gotten from game to game is a testament that something is clearly wrong. If they just did the easier thing and followed Halo 4's blueprint, Master Chief could easily be seen with the same reverence Kratos currently is.
Come on, Chief. Take a girl for a ride.
Whether or not you agree that Halo 4 and 5 were better games overall, there's no arguing that Halo Infinite absolutely didn't go to plan. It didn't even make its initial 2020 release alongside the series consoles because its underwhelming E3 demo shamed it into a delay. Even in 2023, the situation is still so bad that the only relevant question is, can 343 even recover from this? I say yes, but 343 needs to be brave enough to make the big decision, and Phil Spencer needs to be brave enough to enforce real consequences if they don't. What's this decision? 343 needs to abandon Halo Infinite as soon as possible, in favour of a current-gen only sequel that uses Unreal Engine 5.
But this wasn't the mission.
The missions changed. They always do.
343 can't develop enough content for Infinite's multiplayer due to its use of the notoriously difficult Slipspace engine. A move to Unreal 5 solves this because when a new developer is hired, months aren't wasted learning a new engine. An especially important aspect for Microsoft, considering its hiring practices only allow contract workers, which make up a significant amount of 343 staff, to be employed for 18 months. Sure, Microsoft will have to pay Epic to use the engine, which is obviously more expensive than using a proprietary one. But if you can pay $69 billion for Activision, I think you can license the industry's most popular engine. For the single-player campaign, 343 just need to keep it simple. Between the amount of senior management and even 343 head Bonnie Ross departing, it's clear something was wrong with the actual structure of 343. I don't think it's fair for me to even attempt to assign blame on one person, because I obviously wasn't there. And hopefully, the changes that have been made have taken these mistakes into account. After all, it was 343 themselves who said Infinite suffered from internal instability, as it was split into fiefdoms of conflicting decisions that resulted in 4 or 5 games being developed simultaneously. This lack of cohesion just isn't acceptable with such an important IP. We don't need the promise of ongoing content for the campaign. We don't want to have to read books or play Halo Wars to understand the story. Just iterate on Infinite's semi-open world with a simple Master Chief focused story. Finally, the game also needs to be current gen only, because yes, the 2013 Xbox One that was already considered weak when it launched will be a problem. I actually plan on doing a whole video dedicated to how weaker hardware absolutely can hold back game design, so do be on the lookout for that. Considering we're now over 2 years into the generation though, this would be a guarantee anyways, so let's move on. I know what I'm proposing is drastic, but Halo Infinite is now so tarnished that I don't see how it can ever have the success it was meant to, even if it becomes the game it was always meant to be. Better to learn from your mistakes, cut your losses, and show what a revamped 343 is capable of in a new game that fans will give a clean slate. Now, if that game also fails for similar reasons, or 343 just refused to move on from Infinite, Phil needs to do what's right and take Halo away. I know they were created specifically to continue the franchise, but what's the point of owning so many titans in the first-person genre, like id, Machine Games, and Obsidian, if they can't have the opportunity to take what Phil said himself is Xbox's most important IP and create a game worthy of that importance? I guarantee that no Xbox fan would complain, and 343 would only have themselves to blame if the once unthinkable became their reality.